everyone. A quick word about referrals and endorsements. The Straight Spouse Network does not make referrals to individual therapists, counselors, or mental health professionals or programs, and does not make recommendations for any other professional services. However, if you are part of a face-to-face group, or you have been connected with a volunteer contact in your community, your volunteer may have personal recommendations for those resources. Also, the Straight Spouse Network does not recommend, represent, or endorse any particular product, publication, service, or individual, including those featured on the Straight Spouse Voices podcast. That being said, sometimes our guests on the podcast have written a book, or created a website, or teach a class or workshop geared toward the straight spouse experience. While the Straight Spouse Network does not endorse any of these products, services, or people, we interview these guests because they have compelling stories to tell or expertise to share, and we feel it's important for our listeners to know that resources are out here for you, and for you to make your own decisions about whether or not you want to buy that book, visit that website, or participate in a workshop if it resonates with you. Hey everyone! Welcome to today's episode of the Straight Spouse Network podcast, Straight Spouse Voices. I'm your host, Kristen Kelbley, and I was a straight spouse. Our guest today is Sara Schulting-Kranz. Sara is a life coach, a Grand Canyon wilderness retreat guide, a survivor, an athlete, speaker, writer, executive producer, mother of 3, an adventure seeker, with a pair of, I must say, great red heels, and the subject of a new documentary film called Walk Through This, A Story of Starting Over. Sara, welcome to the podcast today. I'm so pleased to have you on our show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I followed your story and the guide trips that you do in the Grand Canyon, and I really hope I can make it out there one day and go on a hike with you through the Grand Canyon. It's been a while since I've been there. It was my honeymoon. So I kind of need a do-over with the Grand Canyon, I think.
Yeah. Make hope into I am.
Yes, I love that. Okay, we've got you on the show. You are a straight spouse, and as I always do at the top of the show, I like to start with people's stories. And so, Sara, would you please tell us how you became a straight spouse, how you found out that you actually were a straight spouse? What's your story?
So my story is, it's very complex, as I'm sure most are. I found out coming up on 5 years ago, actually, Thanksgiving Eve. So it was 2013 when my spouse came home and was supposed to be home making pies with me for dinner for Thanksgiving. I was having 48 people over. We were having 48 people over for Thanksgiving, and he didn't show up. And so he finally walked through the door late at night, and he was on something. He was tripping out on drugs. I didn't know that he was even into drugs, and it was pretty bad. He was on something that was really making him not himself. And through the process of that, we had throughout the entire evening, I walked him up and down the street. I had no idea what was going on. And we walked up and down the street all through the night. I kept him just so I could figure out what was happening. We ended up having Thanksgiving the next day with 48 people. And then the following morning, he came and told me, once he was not tripping anymore, that he had been leading a double life, literally just like that. I've been doing something that I need to tell you about. So over the course of the next 4 to 5 days, if anybody knows about discovery and disclosure, my discovery happened over the next 4 to 5 days, where I literally went through phones, went through his text messages, went through his voicemails that were deleted, and uncovered 14 years of betrayal over 4 days.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I found out through that time, then, my disclosure happened, my discovery happened, my disclosure happened. And then over the next 4 to 5 days, I know it's going to sound really crazy to a lot of people, but it was the start of what has now become an incredible journey of finding myself. And finding everything out about him. And then also kind of granting him his foundation to live an authentic life.
Wow. I mean, there's so much that you said just in that sort of introduction that I want to ask more about. So let me just start with the details. So 14 years, was that your entire length of your marriage? So basically his behavior had been going on for the entirety of your marriage, or did it start at some point into the marriage?
So he and I don't see eye to eye on this.
Mm-hmm.
We were married at the time for 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
I finally found out, and again, I became my own private investigator, my own detective. And I found out through talking and researching and talking to people that I knew, I kind of had feelings that they knew what's going on. And once I kind of put them up against the wall, they finally fessed up and said, yeah, this was happening. I finally found out, I know for certain that it started 3 years into our marriage. In my own intuitive hit as a woman, mom, wife, former lover, I believe that he knew of it prior to getting married.
Mm.
Again, this is coming from my side.
Mm-hmm.
We do not agree on that. And that's okay.
Right. I think you speak to a couple of very common experiences. First off, becoming your own private investigator. That happens quite frequently. I think whether the betrayal and the infidelity is with a partner who is LGBT or straight, when that happens, that betrayal happens, that's a super common experience. But also the question of intuitively having an idea of when our spouse knew they were LGBT. And I certainly believe that mine knew before he married me. And I think he would have a very different take on that as well. Like we would be in the same agree to disagree space as you are. I wanted to ask about, you have kids, 3 kids, is that correct?
Yes, I have 3 boys.
It sounds like then your husband at the time he did come out, he came clean in essence. It wasn't something you discovered. It was something that he tipped you off to. So there was an effort to at least come clean. Is that correct?
Not really.
Oh, okay.
So it sounds that way. So he came clean to the fact that, yes, he had been having extramarital relations with men. Mm. And then the peeling of the onion, that's kind of how I like to look at it. That was the start, right? And then I kept having to unpeel until I finally got down to the bottom of it. He told me that he was bi, and really because I didn't even know there were drugs involved. I mean, I say proudly that I've never even smoked a joint. I mean, I'm a clean individual in terms of that. I had no idea what coke was, what the effects were. I had no idea what meth was, which is very prevalent in the gay community. I had no idea. So I was not only uncovering the fact that there were men involved, but the fact that there were drugs involved and that there was this whole double life involved. So he told me at the time that day that yes, there were men. So over the course of the next year, for me, it was making sure that he was in recovery in terms of the drugs, alcohol addiction, the sex addiction. And so it did not fully come out, him being gay, him stepping into that area of his life, fully did not really happen until 1 more year later. So it was September of the next year that it really stepped into, look, you're not bi, you're gay, and this is not going to work. Me living a life of this, meaning myself as the spouse. So he did not fully come out that night. He came partially out. How's that? He opened the door.
Right. Which I think is a common experience for a lot of women and maybe some men too, that information comes out in a trickle. That it's like you find out one thing and then you find out another thing and then you find out another thing. And it takes time to find out exactly how deep the rabbit hole goes. And that's a constant stream of traumas. It's not just one rip the Band-Aid off fast. It's a continual stream of traumas that occur over sometimes months and even in your case, a year or more.
Oh, it's still happening.
Right.
This isn't something that you just, I found out most of it over the course of the 4 to 5 days. I still find stuff out and realize that when you're in my shoes, and I only speak for myself, I now look back and go, oh my gosh, that was that. And the red flags, I say it's almost like a Rolodex, right? You keep going back and different things hit you and you think, oh my gosh, that's what that moment was. I still text my husband and say, ex-husband, and say, was I right on this now? Because I want to make sure that all of those red flags that I now see as red flags throughout my marriage, also I can use as a life coach now, as a friend.
So you wanted to be able to use the red flags
Right.
that you had discovered as a life coach, as a future partner, going forward in your life. I think you bring up a couple really super important things that I want to highlight about what you just said. Number one is the going back through our life constantly and saying, was that real? Was that real? Was that real? Because when we are living in the closet with somebody else and we don't know we're in a closet, we are essentially being gaslighted in those moments, whether our spouses intend to or not. Our reality that we're living does not match with the actual reality that we're living. And it causes, I think, and maybe you can speak to this experience, a great deal of dissonance with what our instincts are telling us and then what our rational brains are telling us, or what our spouses are telling our rational brains that they should be thinking. And the other thing I want to say is I think it's brilliant. You've done something that I try to do in my own life, which is to take that sense of my intuitiveness that I spent years suppressing, second guessing, dismissing. And this time around, as I go forward in my life, saying, I'm going to listen to that intuitive wisdom. I'm going to listen to my body. When I get a hit or a ping that something is off, I'm going to say something. I'm going to follow it. I'm going to find out what's going on, because I'm not going to dismiss that intuitive knowing and knowledge and wisdom that I think all human beings have going forward anymore.
Well, and let's go back to my kids here too, because you mentioned my three boys. Mm-hmm. The most important thing that I have highlighted throughout this entire experience is them in terms of their own health, safety, but also learning from this. So I talk to my own kids about, look, when your intuitive sense comes up, I don't care if you're on the basketball court. I don't care if you're in the pool playing water polo. I don't care if it's with your friends, with another woman, with whoever it is. You have to listen to that. It is so, so important. It's a gift that we as humans completely push down. And I look back at it now and think, oh my gosh, I learned so much coming out of this as a woman, and as a human being in terms of listening to that. So putting them first and teaching that whole instinct to them was so important for me.
I love that. I love that it's not only relearning for ourselves as adults how to pay attention, because we're not taught that as kids in our culture. We're not taught how to honor our instincts and our guts, but then also to teach future generations. And I completely agree with you that that is one of the gifts in this experience. Not that I would want to repeat it or do it or wish it on anybody, but at the same time, it did give me an opportunity to really cultivate my own sense of trust in myself, that I knew what was going on. And I want to talk to you more, Sara, about relational betrayal and trauma after we take a quick break. And we'll get into more of some of the long-lasting and longer-term effects of these kinds of relationship betrayals in just a moment after we take a quick break. Stay with us, everybody, and we'll be right back with more Sara Schulting-Kranz. The Straight Spouse Network would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Stephanie Schuyler, who generously offered to sponsor the engineering and editing of the Straight Spouse Voices podcast for the remainder of Season 1. If you think we're doing good work and you'd like to hear more straight spouse stories, please consider offering your financial support at weblink.donorperfect.com/voices. And Stephanie, I would like to personally thank you for your generous and critical support in keeping us on the air. And we're back with Sara Schulting-Kranz. And Sara, I wanted to, in this segment of the podcast, talk to you because you and I have talked on the phone before this, and we've both kind of chatted freely about our own experiences with the aftermath of this kind of deep relationship betrayal. So can you tell me how this affected you in your life? What road did you walk in the aftermath of your own discovery of your husband's infidelity and his sexuality?
I was so deeply traumatized. I can't even put words to it. And I tell everybody that. You cannot put words to it. The PTSD that just shakes every cell within your body is mind-numbing. I ended up taking that, and because I am an athlete too, and I love the outdoors, and that's when I started finding my clarity when I was on the water. I would paddle deep into the Pacific Ocean. I would run trails. I would coincidentally run into things when I was running, literally, like run into poles and stuff because my mind just wasn't there. I got pretty beat up, and not just mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. I got pretty beat up, and I found myself when I was in nature finding my clarity.
Thank you so much for saying how deeply traumatizing this is. I think that sometimes there is pressure to not acknowledge that. There's pressure to hurry up and heal. There's pressure to get past it quickly because it's not maybe politically correct to say that we're traumatized by these marriages. And it really can knock you for a loop, and that is a vast understatement. And the PTSD you bring up too, I think people sometimes quizzically raise an eyebrow like, PTSD, really? And I was diagnosed with PTSD because of the ongoing trauma of having been lied to and having been gaslighted and the script flipped. And, we think of PTSD as, and maybe you can speak to this as well, PTSD as like, the acute trauma, a sexual assault or an IED attack in a war zone or something like that. And that is absolutely correct. But there's also new research coming forward about complex PTSD, CPTSD, where the trauma is not acute, but it's sustained over a long time of being in an abusive environment. And when your reality is shifting under your feet for day after day, month after month, year after year in a marriage where the truth is not known to you, that is a traumatizing experience. And then oftentimes if the marriage falls apart in a very traumatic way with a lot of discovery and finding out that the life you were living was not the life that you thought you were living, that in itself is a different kind of trauma. So yes, PTSD is real, and it absolutely can be present in the survivor of a marriage like this.
Absolutely. And I'm going to bring up another point in that, if you don't mind.
Please.
So I was also raped when I was 17. And my oldest son, I got pregnant from this rape. And this is in also the documentary that's being created of my life. The police would not press charges. And so there was a whole betrayal there, right? And so it's this whole, people don't believe me. Did this really happen? You start to second guess yourself. And so when I then came out of this, when I was working through the PTSD from this particular situation, relationship with my husband, it took one person, one therapist who I called, and I said, I don't know what's going on in me. And she said, honey, you are experiencing PTSD. Because I told her the whole thing, and then I explained to her about what had happened in my past as well. And I said, I'm linking these two together, and I don't get it. What is happening? And what happens is that when you go through another traumatic experience like this, it also brings up the trauma from the past, which I hadn't really worked through, I now realize. Because I was 17, pregnant, had my child, kept my child, I had people that thought that they were going to take my child and adopt him out, which I didn't know about. I mean, the level of betrayal, Kristen, was so deep. And it was really then through all of this that I realized it was like, again, peeling of the onion, right, of my own life and going, wow, I've got to address all this stuff, which is exactly what I did through, my own trauma healing and through nature and through seeking the right help and getting the right support and realizing that, wait a second, in all of this, I'm not even alone. There are so many people walking my path right now as we're having this conversation.
And I think you bring up a great point that something like this will absolutely relate back and circle back to any unprocessed trauma. I think you are such a phenomenal example of that. Like that if we let this experience teach us, that if we let this experience be sort of the trigger of being able to sort of clean out the entire closet, not to make a bit of a wah, 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 like a bad joke, but to clean out the entire closet of our own lives, that is a tremendous opportunity that we can choose to take.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I wanted to ask you too, so you mentioned finding the right help and finding the right support. And I wonder if you could talk about what that was for you, because I know our listeners are out there and many of them are looking for support and help that resonates with them. And not everything is going to resonate with everybody. Like what works for me is not going to work for you, is not going to work for the next person. So how did you find help and support?
So the interesting thing about this is I didn't at first. When I found help from, this is me also learning about myself. I didn't put myself first. I put him first. And I found a 35-day facility for him to go to and really focused on him. And then I focused on my kids. And then sadly, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, I focused on me. I think in the long run, I should have put myself first, along with my children. And I'm happy that I did it the way that I did. Again, more learning. It was interesting because when we got him into the facility, nobody even asked about me. No one. And you can sense the anger in that, a little bit of frustration, because I remember making phone calls New Year's Eve of that year, 2013. To the facility and saying, I need help. I am falling apart. And no one listened. It went straight to voicemail after voicemail after voicemail. And it was devastating because then again, it's more betrayal. And I'm just left out to dry. So I really, though, didn't want to fall apart because I have my children. And so I just sought help. I admit I drank too much, completely admit to that. I had moments where I just didn't know what else to do and never had an alcohol problem, but I have now completely taken every alcohol out of my life, every drop of it, because I literally was at a loss. And I think that's very common for some people, is that they don't know what to do. And so I eventually finally found one person through the gamut of, networking, and Dorrit Reichenthal. Owe my life to her. I absolutely owe my life to her. And now we work together, which is amazing. She's the one that I called and she picked up the phone and said, you're experiencing PTSD. She wasn't home at the time. She was helping her mom. She was down in Florida at the time. And she said, as soon as I get home, you and I will meet. And she sat with me and explained everything to me and said, this is what's going on. And it was like somebody finally hearing me for what was going on, for what was happening. She then directed me to a support group, and Dan Drake, also another amazing therapist who was directing the support group. So I found a support group. I found Dorrit. I just kept paddling. I kept running. I kept finding my friends. Slowly, I was telling people my story. And then what truthfully was the biggest thing for me was going public and actually sharing what was happening. Somebody asked me to be on their blog post, and I said, sure. So I wrote everything into a blog. I posted it on Facebook, and coincidentally, it was the same day that the marriage enactment went into effect here in California. Had no idea it was going to be posted that same day.
Wow.
Yes. And then through that, just really getting my story out there was my healing piece, because I was not going to let this become and overtake my life. I was not going to sit in anger. I was not going to, I was going from victim into survivor and using that story to help other people. So really, I had to find a lot of my own help. I had to find a lot of my own, people to support me. My family was amazing. And also I learned a lot from what I learned through coming out of the trauma of my rape when I was 17. I resorted back to a lot of the healing tools that I used back then, coincidentally taught to me by my own mom, that also got me through this.
There's so much in there that I want to talk about, and I've made even some notes here while I'm sitting listening to you, and we're going to talk about those questions that I have as soon as we take another quick break, and then we'll be right back with more Sara. Hey everyone! If you enjoy listening to the Straight Spouse Voices podcast, do us a favor and tell a friend about us and ask them to tune in. We are now available on iHeartRadio as well as iTunes. Also, please rate our podcast on your podcast app. We love every star you give us, especially when you give us all 5. And help us raise our profile by leaving us a review on your podcast app. And if you want to leave comments on an episode, you can do so by following the link in the podcast description. All comments are moderated and anonymous for our protection, as well as yours. And we're back with Sara Schulting-Kranz. Sara, okay, so many things that I made notes about while I was listening to you talk in the last segment. First off, I want to say how I think amazing it is when you were talking about your I think friend and life coach who told you were experiencing PTSD, how important it is to sort of, for us while we're healing sometimes, to have a label for what it is we're experiencing. With my therapist, she was like, well, you have symptoms of PTSD because I had night terrors, like nightmares for years, probably 5 or 6 years post-divorce, and other symptoms as well that are classic PTSD. And I think what's interesting is, but I didn't know why. Like at that point, my ex was not out of the closet. He was remarried and he came out to the second ex-wife, who's now a second ex-wife. But I didn't know the truth. So I've got these PTSD symptoms and I'm going, I have no idea why. Like, I don't understand what just happened to me. So it can be so important, I think, for straight spouses or anybody healing from trauma to have a label to put with what you're going through. And then we have something to grab onto while we're healing. The other thing I want to say is finding your healing in nature that was not quite how I found my healing. So I want to hear more about that. Like, you walking into poles is so classic PTSD. Like, your brain is literally offline. But so you kept running into poles and you just got out there and kept running, even if that meant you were running into more poles.
Very true, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I have a scar.
How perfect, right?
How perfect. I love my scars, every one of them. And literally every one of my scars, I tell people that. I love them. They are me. What's interesting is I knew something was happening prior to me finding everything out. And my girlfriends who I run with said, I decided, I wanted to run an ultra marathon. And so I ended up running over the course of this entire thing, 5 ultra marathons on Catalina Island. If anybody that doesn't know, an ultra marathon is 50 miles. And every single one of them was for a different purpose. So even this morning, I went on a run, and my intention prior to running this morning was thinking about this particular podcast. So I always do that. I always set an intention prior to doing anything that's physical, because it also gives me meaning to it, right? And gives me the thought of, what am I working through? What am I thinking about? What's going on? So every one of my ultra marathons had a intention to them. And I wrote a whole blog post on it, actually. It's on my Facebook page, and I don't need to go into that. But that was where my healing started. So for example, and I would find a lot of metaphors when I was in nature. I was 4 miles offshore on my paddleboard, stand-up paddling alone, for example, and found myself in fog. Absolute dense fog, could not see a thing. And I sat out there and I thought, okay, I can either panic or I can use what I have around me. If it's the current, the water, the wind, the waves, whatever it is, the surf, and I can get myself in. And so for me, the metaphor of finding myself in the fog was the metaphor of my life at the time too. I was in a flippin' fog. There were a lot of times where I just didn't know what was up and what was down. And I used those 4 miles to actually get myself straight back into the harbor. I landed directly into the harbor where I actually had launched my board. And along the way, what was really cool is I found there were dolphins that would come up next to me and take me in, which for me, I'm a very spiritual person. So I look at when I am doing whatever it is that I'm doing right now, if it's guiding or whatever, I notice everything around me. I feel my ancestors. I can feel God. I'm a very spiritual person in that way. And so it's so metaphorical of life, right? It's like, I got myself there. I know that within me, I am my own guide, and I can get myself to wherever it is that I need to be. In terms of my own healing and processing and finding and guiding other people.
You're speaking my metaphysical language. Like, I also work in metaphor and spirituality as well in my own healing. And the metaphor of being in the fog, I can so relate to that and have had multiple experiences too, where I was just in a moment where I was like, okay, this is a metaphor for my life or this part of my journey or where I am. And I think that is a wonderful touchstone when we're in our healing, if we can do that, because it also connects us to sort of like the larger mythology of humanity, you know, like we're part of this mythological creation of humanity where we all have these heroes' journeys, and that sets us in a larger context that is just bigger than just our own selves.
You know, the average person spends 7% of their life outdoors. 7%.
Wow.
And yet we're meant to be outdoors. We're
Right.
meant to actually ground ourselves in nature. We're meant to actually be one with this earth. And as crazy as that may sound to some people, it's amazing what happens when you start to listen to everything around you.
Yeah, I bow down to you around the ultra marathon stuff. Like I'm just like in awe. I'm trying to make myself go run half a mile or something like that. I'll get there.
I was not some huge athlete. I love the outdoors. I was born and raised near farmlands and everything, obviously. I didn't start running until I moved down here to SoCal and all of a sudden just put my shoes on.
Wow.
And thought, okay, I'm going to start this. So yeah, my journey in the outdoors didn't start until I was mid 30s. Wow. I'm now 45. So
that's incredible. So I want to say a little bit about what you do now, and I want to see if I can get this right. Like, you are a coactive professional life coach with a wilderness first responder and a multidimensional partner trauma model certified coach. Did I get all that right? And what does all of that mean?
It's a lot, right?
Yeah.
So when I was coming out of all of this, out of my own trauma healing, it was actually Dorrit who said to me, you need to do something with this. I see you doing something with this. She's got this incredible vision. And so I thought, okay, I'll become a coach, because I was a teacher growing up. I've got my 3 boys. I've been a basketball coach. I've done all that kind of stuff. And so I went back to school and I got certified through CTI in Northern California to be a professional life and leadership coach. And I spent so much time healing in nature. I thought, you know what? I want other women and men to be able to do the same thing. So I had hiked the Grand Canyon multiple times, and that's actually where I found a lot of my healing, was in the Grand Canyon. That's metaphorical. Like, you have to go so deep within yourself to come out the other side clean.
Right.
That right there is where it's at. So I decided I was going to start running retreats in the Grand Canyon for women, primarily women. I do them with men as well, for them to be able to heal. And so I went back and got my wilderness first responder certification, got my commercial use authorization in the Grand Canyon, and I now guide women down into the Grand Canyon. We spend 2 nights at the bottom, and we do a lot of healing. We do meditation, mindfulness, sometimes yoga. I bring in specialists, other coaches who are amazing breathwork coaches, yoga coaches, meditation coaches, and we really focus on the multidimensional healing, right, that comes with trauma. I'm certified through APSATS, which is the Association for Partners of Sex Addicts Trauma Specialists. So I do a lot of that as well. So because healing is multidimensional, you can't just take it from one angle. It doesn't work that way. I would love it if it was. I would love it if there was a handbook. There is no handbook. So what works for one person doesn't work for another. And I will tell you that the transformation that I've seen in every single one of my clients has been it's just beautiful. I can't, no words. It's just beautiful.
Well, and we have to heal trauma in the body too. You know, there's a brilliant book out there by Bessel van der Kolk called The Body Keeps the Score that is based in research, tremendous new research that's coming out. We can go to therapy, and I'm a supporter of therapy. I did therapy for many, many years, but there is another element of healing trauma in the body. I'm kind of blown away, frankly, about this model of healing trauma in nature, because I went at it from a very spiritual angle and a very metaphysical angle, and, you know, did a lot of retreats and a lot of meditation and stayed very internal and also very indoors.
Right.
So,
isn't that fascinating?
Right. Yes. And it was was a phenomenal journey, but now I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, I got to get out there to the Grand Canyon. I need to go hiking just because it would be amazing to go hiking in the Grand Canyon.
Well, and so that's what's so cool is that people say, oh, I get to go hike the Grand Canyon. I'm like, oh, just wait. It's so much more than that. And it's really, what's really amazing is that every group that comes together is so different. And I always say you're meant to be with those women for whatever reason. I do not put these together. I do not bring those people together. They somehow or another, spiritually guided, all come together, and that's where it's at. We do a lot of work prior to and post retreat though too. So we do a lot of self-exploration. What are your values? Who are you as a woman? Writing letters. That's huge to your past, present, future. We let a lot of stuff go in the canyon. We talk a lot about carrying what's not yours and letting it go, because we do. I was not about to carry my ex-husband's story for the rest of my life. That was not going to happen. So I share a lot when I'm with people too, and how I healed, in hopes that it gives them inspiration, knowledge, tools to heal themselves.
That's brilliant. And you're about to lead a blind woman on a hike through the Grand Canyon, which is so metaphorical in itself. I'm like, my English major juices get so flowing around metaphor, and
love it.
So that's brilliant.
So Sean Cheshire, if you don't know her, you need to, and you will. She came to me to go on the June retreat with us. I just finished up a June retreat with a group of women, and she called me and she said, can I go? And I was like, absolutely. Not even think. I didn't know one blind person. And so, but I was like, absolutely, you have to go. I don't say no unless there's a really big reason to say no. And I didn't tell anybody on the retreat that she was blind. And so when we had our first call, I said, Sean, this is your story to tell. You need to let these women know. And it was just like you could hear the pin drop. It was so cool because it was life altering for the other women on that retreat to feel, see, and experience the canyon through somebody that really couldn't see it and had to see it in a different way.
Wow.
It was unbelievable. So I guided, she was on my retreat in June. I love this woman. She's a Paralympian. She has not always been blind. She lost her eyesight over TBIs. She's a vet. She was a medic, and her story is just incredible and inspiring for me. And so when she decided I want to be the first blind woman to hike the canyon rim to rim to rim, I was like, yeah, please. Here's what's really funny. And she'll laugh when she listens to this, because I'm sure she will. I've always wanted to hike the canyon rim to rim to rim, but couldn't find anybody to do it with me. And so I was like, Sean, it took you to make this happen for me. And so she's just like, oh yeah, whatever. She calls me Blondie. And so she's like, oh, whatever, Blondie. So we're doing it on October 7th. There's 4 of us. There's 2 men that are doing it as well. It's a lot of work guiding somebody that can't see, because you're having to actually also explain to them what the trail is like at the same time that you're kicking rocks out of the way for them and making sure that they're safe. And so there's 4 of us total.
Wow.
That are doing it. Yeah. Yeah. I'm so stoked. I can't even tell you. I'm so excited.
That is just coming up right around the corner. Well, Sara, we wish you all 4 of you, so much luck and Godspeed with this tremendous journey. And we'll be following it, and we can't wait to hear more about it when it's all through. And for anyone who is interested in learning more about you, about your life, your coaching practice, you can find out more about Sara at liveboldlycoaching.com. And if you are interested in finding more about the documentary Walk Through This that is currently being filmed about Sara and her life, and if you're interested in sponsoring the documentary, because they are looking for funders, you can find that website at walkthroughthis.com. And Sara, I'm so honored to know you, excited to know you.
Yeah.
I feel like you're a fellow traveler, and I have loved talking to you. I hope I get to meet you, hopefully in the Grand Canyon at some point in my future. I'm going to put that intention out there. Absolutely. Yep. And thank you for being a voice for straight spouses and sharing with us your story, and your story of healing too, because it's a really remarkable healing story. And also, I just want to thank you for your leadership in the community and showing an example of how we can not only fully heal from this, but actually turn it into sort of the fertile ground in which we can birth a new life.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for everything that you're doing. You're providing a platform for us to speak out, and that's huge. It takes a lot of people to make the change.
It does.
Starts with one. It starts with one.
It does.
Starts with one.
And it takes all of us.
It does. Yes, it does.
Thank you, Sara, for being a guest on the show. It's been a joy to have you. Everybody who's been tuning in today, listening, thank you so much for listening to our show. Please don't forget to leave comments and feedback on the link provided in the podcast description. Also, don't forget to rate our podcast on your podcast app. Please give us 5 stars. Leave a little review. To Brian Pickrell, thank you for engineering and editing and mastering our show to such a professional quality. He does a fine job, getting better all the time. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in today. And until next time, this is your host, Kristen, reminding you that all of our voices matter.